Today we're taking a break from the rain to take a look at the 2025 Cadillac Lyriq together. The Lyriq was the first vehicle GM built on their new Ultium electric car platform back in 2022. And Caddy's aggressive electric initiative was off to a slow start back then, but it's really gained steam, especially in 2025, because by the end of this year, there will be 6 Cadillac electric models on sale in the US, and likely soon a 7th if we do get that ultra-luxury convertible from Cadillac. All of this is just in time for politics to, shall we say, start getting in the way of some companies' electrification initiatives, but I will let you all decide the politics of that down there in the comment section for yourself. We won't really touch that in this video, but we are going to talk about pricing and, of course, tax credits at the end. The big thing to know, though, is that by the end of this year, this will likely be officially replacing the Cadillac XT5, because XT4 production has already ended. XT5 and XT6 production is expected to end at the end of calendar year 2025. And that's quite logical because there are full electric replacements for all 3 of those models now in the lineup. The one model continuing for sure, that's the Escalade, but there is an electric Escalade. Be sure to check out that video if you haven't already done so. When General Motors first launched the platform formerly known as Ultium, they made a lot of promises. Promises on tax credits, performance, over-the-air updates, etc. I was a little bit skeptical, but by and large, General Motors has delivered on those promises, albeit a little slower than I might have liked. The Lyriq is a good example. Back in 2022, it launched with the rear-wheel drive model only, and it was quite a while until the 2024 model year that we got all-wheel drive finally available. But then we've seen some pretty rapid changes. They finally delivered the Velocity package, which allows that model to go quicker 0 to 60. Now we have the Lyriq V entering production now. You should actually see it on dealer lots right around the time that you're watching this video, and that's going to get the Lyriq 0 to 60 in 3.3 seconds, thanks to 615 horsepower under the hood. And we also have a bunch of other electric models. From the Optic, that's the Lyriq basically shrunken down and less expensive. We have the Vistic, that's the 3-row model, the Escalade IQ, the IQL, the Celestiq, and soon the Soleil as well. But the Lyriq, that's the OG model. And intriguingly, it's also the only model that's going to have CarPlay. Definitely one reason you might want to consider this over some of those other Ultium family vehicles. I also think that it looks fantastic. GM definitely wanted a long hood profile, which we certainly have in this platform, and they wanted the front end to look instantly recognizable as a Cadillac. So we have these multi-module LED headlights, the distinctive turn signals up there that blink and then fade off. The long hood was an interesting and deliberate choice by Cadillac, but it is a tiny bit controversial. We'll get to why in just a second. But the long hood and the long wheelbase give this definitely a stretched station wagon vibe. The wheelbase is extraordinarily long at 122 inches. That's actually 1 inch longer than a gasoline Cadillac Escalade. And that's especially surprising given the fact that this is a lot shorter than the Escalade at 196.7 inches long. But it is bigger than most of its direct competition. It's 4 inches longer than a Polestar 3, 10 inches longer than a Tesla Model Y, and only 1.6 inches shorter than a Tesla Model X. In the Tesla lineup, the Model X is probably the more appropriate competitor to this because remember, it starts as a 2-row SUV, but also we have the closely related Acura ZDX that's going to compete with this, the BMW iX, the Mercedes-Benz EQE, etc. That's how they call this the bestseller in its segment. At least Cadillac does, because they're calling this a different segment than the Tesla Model Y, just in case you're wondering. Now, since this is ostensibly replacing the XT5 eventually in the lineup, you should know that the roofline is 2 inches lower, which is why this looks more like a wagon than the XT5. But also, we have similar ground clearance and the battery pack between, so the interior is actually a little bit more compact and wagon-like as well. On the wheel and tire front, this model has 22-inch wheels wrapped in 275 40R22 tires. The tire is a Michelin all-season eco-focused tire. If you want something more aggressive with big Brembo brakes to back it up, then you want the upcoming Lyriq V. That's going to better handle the curb weight of the Lyriq, which has been a common complaint about GM's new EV line. That applies to this model as much as it does all of the other upcoming vehicles, but we'll talk about why that is towards the end of the video. Big thing you should know, though, is that even though these tires are relatively wide, it's not going to handle as well as something lighter. I'm definitely getting Sportback meets Sport Wagon vibes on the rear. We have a rear window that is definitely more horizontal than it is vertical, and then this relatively big hatch section below. The narrow greenhouse means that visibility rearward is a little bit pinched compared to some of the competition, but I think it's an attractive look overall. We don't have a rear window wiper though. Instead, we have this spoiler on top and then a little ducktail spoiler there. The button to open the hatch is right there, and the bottom of that hatch is the load-in height as well. No modern Caddy would be complete without huge taillights, but with a lack of vertical real estate, they wrap the taillight from the hatch all the way to the side, back here practically to the rear passengers' heads. This module is enormous, and then it's coupled with that other turn signal module down there. The reason the long hood is controversial is because underneath it, we do not find a storage area even in the rear-wheel drive model. And that's because regardless of which wheels are powering the Lyriq, we still have quite a lot going on under the hood. The heat pump, a lot of the electronics, the AC-DC charger, for instance. We also have the 12-volt battery system, fuse blocks. All of that is still going on under the hood, regardless of which motor package you get. That makes a lot of sense for profitability reasons, because a lot of this is common with not just the Optic and the bigger models in the lineup, but also less expensive models coming soon that are front-wheel drive only. That's why the charge door is up front, because if you put the charge door up front and the charger up front and the motor up front in those inexpensive vehicles, it helps make everything more profitable. But that doesn't mean this is front power biased. No, it has a 365 horsepower motor in the rear. To that, this model also gets a 150 horsepower motor up front to give it 515 horsepower total, 450 pound-feet of torque. If you want to go even faster 0 to 60, you want the V model that bumps things up to 615 horsepower, 650 pound-feet of torque for a 3.3 second 0 to 60. And it will take the range down just below 300 miles, according to the EPA at least. This one is rated for 319 miles, and if you want the most efficient model, that's the rear-wheel drive model at 326 miles. All of that range is courtesy of a 102 kilowatt-hour battery pack sitting skateboard style underneath the Lyriq, and it is probably the heaviest component in this model. One of the other things going on when it comes to curb weight is the fact that this is a steel unibody vehicle. So Cadillac decided not to go with exotic metals because that would have meant a less profitable vehicle. The counterpoint to that is the added curb weight. Also, importantly, with that battery pack, GM was really invested in making that battery pack serviceable. Bearing in mind that battery pack failure is actually quite rare in an electric vehicle, GM was nevertheless obsessed with making this battery pack repairable, modular, and importantly, interchangeable as well. And that does account for some of the weight in this battery pack. Here's what's going on. The modules in this 10-module pack are the exact same ones that are used in the Hummer EV, or in a Chevy Blazer EV, or a Chevy Equinox EV, etc., etc., etc. They can be mixed and matched, they can be field replaced, swapped out by a dealer, and then they can be sent to General Motors for eventual repair, refurbishment, and then reinsertion in another vehicle. All of that means, though, that the cooling system is a little bit more complex than a glued-together battery pack like in a Tesla, and it's heavier. But it does mean, if you are concerned about that sort of future, you might want to get one of these, because if something goes wrong with the battery, GM says that not only can you swap the battery out now, but future battery packs with compatible chemistry can actually be inserted right into the vehicle. So you don't have to have that exact same pack or that exact same part number in stock at the dealer to fix a Lyriq. You could literally swap one out of the Blazer EV that I have in the driveway right now, pop it in here. The system would self-heal, of course, with the right tools from the dealer to assist in the process, but the battery pack would be happy under this body, just as it would in another Ultium vehicle. The charge port, that's over here in the front. Again, charge electronics in the front. We have a CCS charge connector still. Now, General Motors has promised to use the new J3400 or NACS charge connector, but we don't know exactly when that's going to be on their new vehicles. It looks like the Vistiq launching later this year will still have CCS, but stay tuned for that. I expect that maybe 2026 model year vehicles will start getting the swap. The other thing to know about Ultium, though, the downside, is that they don't charge terribly quickly on a pack level. This pack will charge at 180 kilowatts max, and that is a factor of the voltage in the system and the maximum current that the pack can draw. If you're looking at an Optic, it's going to charge slower. If you're looking at an Escalade IQ, it will charge faster because, again, same modules, we just have more of them in the Escalade, we have fewer of them in the Optic, and the charge rate is definitely based on the module's capability. Here's what the key looks like for the Lyriq, but now there's also an RFID key card. Digital key was promised at the beginning, but now we finally get it. The RFID card is very much like every other RFID card out there. You touch it to the driver's door panel, but unlike some EVs, you don't then place the key card anywhere on the inside. You simply hop inside, put your foot on the brake pedal, hit the start button, and then go, because the RFID reader authorizes not just entry into the vehicle, it also authorizes you to start the car. But if you then park and you don't lock the car, you have to then come back, lock, unlock it with the RFID key card again. Then you can drive it off again. That's the security feature involved. The seating position in the Lyriq is definitely a bit more sedan or wagon-like than crossover-like, and of course the controls are over there on the door, so I have to reach quite a ways in order to get them. The main thing that you should keep in mind is that the seat bottom cushion is a little on the short side, and there's not as much thigh support as you might like. On the other hand, front seat massage is available. We have 4-way adjustable lumbar support, heated and ventilated seats, and a powered memory-linked tilt telescopic steering column. It does move a little on the slow side. Headroom's also relatively generous, but the seating position is a little bit different than the XT5 or XT6 you might be used to. This is certainly a bit more reclined with your legs and your arms stretched out in front of you. Thanks to the length and especially the wheelbase, we have tons of legroom inside the Lyriq, really obvious in the back seat. The seat bottom cushion is a little bit close to the ground for my taste, but that should make it more comfortable for small children. Also, it gives us more effective headroom, which you'll see in a moment. But legroom, that's really the win here. We get significantly more than in a Tesla Model X, or of course something like a Polestar 3, about 5 inches more than the Model X or the 3. We are talking, of course, about the 2-row X. The driver's seat's adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, but there is one thing you should know. If you get a Chevy Blazer, it may look like you have less legroom in that model versus this, but you actually have a little bit more in reality, especially for rear-facing child seats, because of this section of the front seat back. It kind of is a jacket holder, because you can actually hang your jackets right there. It's definitely a style-forward statement, but it's a little on the less practical side of things. Of course, we have an essentially flat floor in the back. This front seat is all the way back in its tracks, and you can see how much room I have in here. The rear seats do recline. It's a 2-stage mechanism. It moves maybe about an inch rearward. I find the upright position the most comfortable. And in this position, my head is brushing the ceiling right back there towards the headrest. But if I'm sitting in a more natural position, I have maybe about 3/4 of an inch of room. We do have an opening moonroof, and that's part of why headroom figures are a little bit below some of the competition that has those fixed glass panes up there. In the center console, we have 3-zone automatic climate control with air vents for the rear seats. We have heated outboard seats, USB-C charge ports, 120-volt outlet there, and a fold-down armrest with 2 cup holders. The rear seats, of course, fold flat with the cargo area, or almost flat, I should say, because there's a little bit of a ramp up, and the latch anchors are pretty easy to find for child seats. Latch anchors are located behind these removable little doors here. We have an easy to find anchor location, but this bulge in the lower seat back may be uncomfortable for some adult passengers. If you've watched this channel for any length of time, you know I don't mind a vehicle without a front trunk, as long as it has a short hood. And that is the problem with the Lyriq. Because we have that long hood, for the size of vehicle, you might assume it has a big trunk, but in fact it does not. It's actually much more similar to the average ICE vehicle with similar exterior dimensions, keeping in mind that roofline, of course. So back here we have 28 cubic feet of storage space, and any way you slice it, you'll find more in something like a Tesla Model Y. Not just back here, but also because it has that front trunk storage area. There is some additional space under the load floor, but I do wish it was arranged a little bit differently. Here we have a case where you can put your EVSE or your charge cords. There's a pretty deep storage well right there, and then a little pizza box shaped area behind. Let's take a look around this Sport trim, which has an MSRP just under $80,000, making this one qualify for the federal tax credit as long as it hangs out. We have the buttons for the OnStar system here, buttons for the panoramic moonroof right there, and a rear view camera. We also have slide to the side sun visors for the driver and front passenger with illuminated vanity mirrors inside. Speaking of the panoramic moonroof, it has a very big pane for the driver and front passenger, and this is the one that opens. I appreciate the fact that they put the bar that divides the pano roof quite a bit further back than usual, so it really gives the driver and front passenger an airy feeling, but it is kind of, I guess, in the eye line of the rear passengers. Now, speaking of the rear passengers, it is a bit difficult to see, but the hinge design of that rear hatch is what really cuts back on rear seat headroom if they want to put their heads right back there towards the headrest, especially in a reclined position. Up front, we have adjustable head restraints with built-in speakers. Those are part of the audio system in this model. Height adjustable shoulder belts. And we have what I think is a really attractive interior color combo. This is sort of a light chestnut color. We then have burgundy piping on the seats. I think it's a really elegant and attractive look. I also really like the design of the upholstery perforations that we have here on this leather seat. These seats offer massage. We also have a lot of adjustability there, but as I said before, the seat bottom cushion is a little on the short side. This is something that I know a lot of folks have written in about that have owned a Lyriq. There's no extendable thigh cushion for some reason at this time. If I could ask for one change, it would be at least a manual thigh cushion extension. Moving on over to the front doors, we do not find the upgraded AKG audio system featuring Atmos that we find in the Optic, interestingly enough, but we do have an AKG audio system in here. We then have real wood trim on the doors with the controls for the front seats, including seat memory for the passenger right there, and lots of soft touch materials in the upper section of the doors. Cadillac has really differentiated these interiors more from the more mainstream models like the Blazer EV than ever before. So really, as far as this interior goes, there's very, very little, if anything at all, actually directly shared with that Blazer EV. And that really goes for the dashboard design, which is dominated by this enormous big LCD right here. One of the best implementations of two-screen CarPlay that I've seen in a while. You can project not just the Apple Maps on that center display there, you can also project Waze, which is kind of a handy touch. Of course, you can also use the built-in Google Mapping if you'd rather do that. The rest of the software, it's pretty similar to the other Ultium vehicles out there, with the exception that we have a start-stop button down here. So unlike some of the newer vehicles where you just put your foot on the brake pedal and click the shifter, here you actually have to start the vehicle and stop it. This display sort of floats across the dashboard. You can see that this panel actually extends behind there. Then we have some ambient lighting as well. We have big air vents over there on the passenger side, and then one really huge air vent right here in the middle of everything for the driver. The glove compartment, it's actuated by the touchscreen. It's not the biggest glove compartment out there, and I wasn't able to fit an 11-inch tablet computer inside, but I do appreciate that all the plastics down lower on the dashboard are more premium than in some vehicles, so this is not a soft touch plastic, but it has kind of a rubbery coating to help make it feel a little bit nicer and not sound quite so strange when you click on it or touch on it. Here we have a storage bin that actually mirrors that piping color. It's kind of that burgundy color there. It's a little handy little storage area, and then we have this big bin right below there that does not have a lid. You can see I have a smartphone in there with the USB cable connected. Controls for the climate control system are those piano key switches right there. And speaking of piano, we have a lot of piano black here, which is already definitely showing some fine scratches. So be sure you're okay with that before you end up buying one of these. Here's the controller knob for the infotainment system. You can use that or the touchscreen. Two big cup holders right there. We have a wireless charging slot there. As you can see, if I open that up, you can see what that looks like inside. Even those larger smartphones and larger cases should have no problem there. We then have an additional USB port here. We have a 12 volt power outlet right there, and a pretty deep storage area. We don't have a head-up display in the dashboard, but I'm actually fine with that because I really think that this is one of the most attractive instrument clusters around. It's pretty configurable. You can see we get media information. There are lots of different ways you can configure this display with the touchscreen over here on this side. Yes, the entire display is basically one big touchscreen, although those touch options, they're a little bit difficult to see sometimes from the driver perspective. You can toggle through the various different views right there. You can even have a clean view. This is also where you would look through your trip computers and check out your efficiency. And there's a shortcut. Sorry, my fingers are really dry, so the system doesn't know what to do with me. But there's also a shortcut to the headlight controls, which can also be done via the center screen. The steering wheel, that's basically the same as other recent Cadillac models. We have the Super Cruise LED bar on top. Lots of shiny black plastic, rather unfortunately here, for things like Super Cruise and the heated steering wheel. These commonly pressed areas definitely start to show wear early. On this side, we have controls for the infotainment system rather than having them on the back of the steering wheel like we find in other vehicles. But we have a paddle on the back like we find in other Caddies. In this model, though, it's just one, and it's a regenerative paddle. It's variable, so it's not just on-off. The harder you pull it, the further you pull it, the more regenerative braking you get. So you can do one pedal, you can do one paddle, or you can drive it like a traditional car. This little thing, that's part of the driver monitoring system. All right, let's get this out on the road. With a 0 to 60 time of 4.6 seconds, this definitely doesn't feel slow, and it's definitely faster than the rear-wheel drive Lyriq we tested not that long ago. But it is slower 0 to 60 than a Polestar 3 all-wheel drive, or of course some of the Genesis models, not to mention the BMW, Mercedes, etc. And that all seems to have to do with the way that Cadillac delivers the power. Some electric car manufacturers are really aggressive at giving you access to all 500 or 600 horsepower at basically 0 miles per hour. In here, if we're going under 40 miles an hour and I floor it, we don't get all the power and all the torque on the boil until you hit about 40 miles an hour. And that's the reason we have that 4.6 second time rather than something faster, given the horsepower and torque of this vehicle. It's also why we have those Velocity Max Pack OTA upgrades available from manufacturers, because for a little extra money, they could dial in a little bit more power, have that power ramp up a little bit more rapidly, etc. In our 60 to 0 stopping test, it took 122 feet for this model to stop, which is definitely longer than something like that Polestar 3. Even though the Polestar 3 is no lightweight. I think that has to do with the brakes, the size of the rotors, calipers, etc., and also the tire compound. The Polestar certainly has more aggressive tires, at least on the last model we tested. The Lyriq and the Optic may be closely related to one another, but they have very different motor strategies. In the Lyriq, we have the bigger electric motor on the back. In the Optic, the bigger motor is on the front. So it definitely has a different feel and a different personality on the road. Even though this is the dual motor model, if we get it in a corner, you definitely feel that rear end swinging out a little bit. It's not crazy, it's not like a Ford Mustang or anything, but it definitely has that solid rear wheel drive luxury car vibe going on. On the other hand, it's pretty heavy. And that's why when it comes to the handling score, I'm going to give this a B-. It has a very stable, very capable feel to it, definitely confidence inspiring, but it's also isolated, a little bit numb. And the suspension definitely is soft. You can definitely feel the body leaning. You get a lot of tip, a lot of dive in the suspension. It's definitely tuned towards the softer side of things. I don't think that's a problem at all, because oddly enough, this is exactly what I want out of a Cadillac. This reminds me a bit more of Cadillac sedans of yesteryear than something like the CT5. And while that may not be everybody's cup of tea, I have to admit, I kind of enjoy it. We also have a very quiet cabin in here. We measured 70 decibels at 50 miles an hour, definitely making this one of the quieter EVs in the segment. And in case you're wondering, this is quieter than the Chevy Blazer in our direct head-to-head tests. Out on a rougher road like the one that we're on here, ride quality is definitely solid. Even considering those 40 series tires, this soaks up small and large imperfections pretty well, handles potholes and speed bumps really elegantly as well, just as you'd expect out of a big Cadillac. But what is not perhaps expected is that the Acura ZDX is the one with the air suspension, and for some reason we don't find that an option on the rear-wheel drive or all-wheel drive versions of the Lyriq. Now, does the Lyriq need it? I would say no, but if it had it, I think it would take the ride quality to the next level and help it better compete with some of those more expensive luxury options. I think Cadillac struck just the right balance between ride and handling, because not everybody out there is interested in something super firmly sprung, and this gives those shoppers an option to choose. We also have something like the Mercedes-Benz EQE, which I think is really quite comfortable, the Acura ZDX, which is closely related to this but has the air suspension, and the Audi Q8. Honestly, this reminds me quite a lot of the Q8. It doesn't remind me that much of the Polestar 3, however, even though I have made some Polestar 3 comparisons. And here's why. The Polestar 3 is much more aggressive at delivering power. It's quicker, it feels faster, it has that torque vectoring rear axle, more engaging steering. It doesn't have the body roll or the tip and dive that we find in this model. It's really trying to be the electric Porsche. But oddly enough, this reminds me a little bit of the BMW iX. That's quite comfortable, but it's a bit more of a traditional SUV shape. On the other hand, thanks to the more wagon-like profile in the Lyriq, despite the curb weight, we find good highway fuel efficiency. We measured 3.1 miles per kilowatt hour out on the open highway at 70 miles an hour, meaning a real-world range from 100% to 0 of about 300 miles. Keep in mind, of course, you're really only going to be using about 70% of that range if you are planning on a road trip where you're going to be DC fast charging, because you're going to want to go down to about 10%, charge up to 80%, rinse and repeat. And the DC fast charge speed here, it's respectable, but it's not the fastest in the segment, so it is going to take you longer to get to that destination if it's over 300 miles away. My week-long average, which includes daily driving up and over a 2,200-foot mountain pass, is a little bit lower than that. We're talking about 2.8 miles per kilowatt hour, and that's because of the curb weight we find in the Lyriq. There's no way around that. It takes more energy to get more weight up a hill, and even though you're going to regenerate some of the weight down the hill, it's not going to be as much as it took to get you up in the first place. Before we get to the pricing, let's coin a new term. I'm going to call this electron lag because it sort of feels like turbo lag. This is not unique to the Lyriq, but here's how it works here. From 0 to 30 miles an hour, we get a pretty linear, power ramp, and then we get an extra bump over 30 miles an hour to 40 miles an hour where all that power comes on. So if you're cruising down the road here and you're, say, going 28 miles an hour and you floor it, you definitely feel this extra shove when the vehicle hits about 30 miles an hour, and then you get that extra acceleration up to 60.
Now let's try and figure out what competes with the Cadillac Lyriq. Obviously, we have mainstream entries, we have the Tesla Model Y, we have a lot of things that you could be cross-shopping against this, but in my mind, at least, the vehicles on your screen are the most direct competitors. So we have the Polestar 3, the Audi Q6 e-tron. I would have favored Q8 e-tron, except that production has already ended for that model. We have the BMW iX, the Mercedes-Benz EQE SUV, and of course the Tesla Model X. The Model X, just feel-wise, size-wise, etc., is closer to the Lyriq than the Model Y is. The Model Y is sportier, it's smaller in certain dimensions, it may have a bigger cargo area, but it's not really as spacious as the Lyriq, and it definitely gives off a different vibe and is targeted towards a different customer. You may have noticed that something is missing on this list. That would be the Lexus RZ. The reason for that, frankly, is that the RZ is just not competitive. It charges slowly, it goes slowly 0 to 60, and the range is not terribly great. But some of that or all of that may be fixed for 2026 because we're going to get new motors, new batteries, etc. for the 2026 RZ. We don't have complete details on it yet, but stay tuned because hopefully we will know more soon. Jumping over the Lexus, let's talk about the Polestar 3. In my mind, this is one of the most compelling alternatives to the Lyriq, mainly because of its price tag. It is definitely within the range of the Lyriq, starting at around $69,000, going on up to $91,350, so actually a little bit less than a top-end Lyriq V. And we get fantastic performance out of this dual-motor system. What's unique about the Polestar 3 is the torque vectoring axle in the back. Polestar said that they designed the Polestar 3 to compete head-on with a future Porsche Cayenne EV, and I think it's obvious. It is just a ton of fun to drive. Even though it is big and it is heavy, you can push that Polestar 3 far harder than you might think possible, and you are really rewarded with that torque vectoring axle in the back. We also get pretty decent range in the new long-range rear-wheel drive model, 350 EPA miles in that model. That's a pretty decent showing. Now, there is no corollary at the moment to the top-end Lyriq V, I might argue, because it doesn't have that much power, and the V will go faster 0 to 60, but the mainline trims of the Polestar compare very well, and the regular all-wheel drive Polestar is definitely faster than the all-wheel drive Lyriq that we were driving this week. Polestar calls this a dedicated EV platform, but SPA2, which also underpins EX90 from Volvo, is very closely related to SPA1, which is what XC90 uses. And that's probably why the wheelbase is identical, the suspension geometry is very, very similar, the crash structures also appear to be very closely related. What they did was they redesigned what was in between to better accommodate a nice big battery pack. But the downside to that is that the wheelbase is shorter than average for this segment. That does give you a decent turning radius, but it also means that the interior feels a bit more cramped because you have those wheel arches intruding in the area where a passenger might want to be in the second row. Now, it is roomier than an EX90 because it's not a 3-row, but it is a little tighter in the back seat than the Lyriq. On the other hand, it is more fun, and I think it's well priced. Now, we don't know whether or not the Polestar 3 and the EX90 are going to get the new 800-volt architecture from the upcoming ES90, but we know it's probably not going to happen until maybe 2027 model year, something like that, if it happens at all. Then we have the Audi Q8 e-tron. Not really, because it's actually gone, so let's talk about the Q6 e-tron. And that is the problem here. The Q8 e-tron was actually closer to the Lyriq in terms of feel and dimension, roominess on the inside, and its mission statement. The Q6 is a little bit smaller, a little bit tighter, closely related to the Macan EV, of course, and that means wicked fast charging in the Q6. If you're looking for an 800-volt EV that charges quickly, has that very dramatic feel, etc., you want to check out the Q6 e-tron. I do think that the infotainment systems are a little bit convoluted. I wish that Audi would redesign their software to make it more intuitive, but we get CarPlay in this model, something that GM is probably going to kill off when the Lyriq gets a refresh. The big thing to keep in mind if you're comparing the Q6 to the Lyriq is the size of the back seat. It is significantly smaller than the Cadillac. That is, again, the big advantage to the Lyriq is just that it's really big back there. But also big on the inside is the BMW iX. It's big inside because it's more upright. It actually is kind of a 21st century BMW X5, if you will. But what's unusual about the iX in a way is that every other BMW electric vehicle they sell in the US is a related or converted ICE platform, if you will. It's related to the gasoline model. The iX is not. It's much more of an exotic materials showcase, I guess you'd say, for BMW. So it's relatively lightweight. It has their latest motor technology in it. It is surprisingly efficient given how big it is, but it's also pretty darn expensive. You'll notice it starts $16,000 more than the Lyriq. Admittedly, you do get a dual motor model in that base version, but it's a pretty big price jump, and it goes on up to $116,050 if you get carried away with options. I love the iX, but it's in a budget class all to its own. Not quite in that same budget class, maybe a semi-step above it, is the EQE. If you love an organic, egg-shaped, ultra-efficient EV SUV, you might want to check out the EQE SUV. Efficiency really is very good in the Mercedes, but it better be because it starts at nearly $80,000 and goes on up to $140,000 if you want the AMG model. And you're probably going to want the AMG model if you're looking at a Lyriq V. Big thing, though, is you could get a Lyriq V and you could get a baby Mercedes for weekends for about the same price as that EQE SUV fully loaded. Things definitely ratchet up very rapidly on the Mercedes pricing chart. The Model X, it doesn't have much of a pricing chart. It is very, very narrow. There are only a few options to choose from, but you should keep in mind that Tesla recently gave it a pretty significant pricing bump. It starts at $86,630, which means no version of the Model X will get the tax credit anymore, whereas the Lyriq, they all get the tax credit, at least starting. So even a Lyriq V, you could get in the base model and still get a tax credit. Fully loaded, of course, the Lyriqs are going to lose it because the cap is about $80,000 there. That is before the destination charge. Model X has pretty decent range. It also has the interesting gull wing doors, if you're interested in that. Falcon wing, sorry. But the cargo area is not as big or as practical as you might assume because of the really dramatically sloping rear end. And that's why, even though you can get your Model X with 3 rows, I would probably stick with the 2-row Model X unless you really needed those emergency back seats. Keep in mind they're going to be smaller than some of the newer, bigger, boxier EVs that we see out there, but it is certainly more comfortable and more accommodating than a Tesla Model Y. Last up, we have the Acura ZDX. The best way to think of this is as the Acura Lyriq, I guess you'd say, because they share an awful lot with one another. Batteries, motors, etc. A lot of the feature set is very similar. We get Super Cruise in the Acura ZDX as well. We get basically the same software, but we get different screens in the dashboard. This has a more traditional 2-screen setup where we have an LCD instrument cluster in a binnacle on the driver's side and more of a stand-up LCD infotainment system in the middle. Of course, we get CarPlay in both of these vehicles, but the implementation in the ZDX is slightly larger just due to the format of the screen. And I think the interior, although it's not as luxurious as the interior in the Cadillac, is a bit more normal and a little bit more comfortable because the front seats are different in their design. So if you do want more thigh support in basically your Cadillac EV, your General Motors EV, you could just get the ZDX. You could get those more comfortable seats. You get about the same kind of interior room. The back seat is definitely very large, and you're not really giving up that much. In fact, depending on how you look at it, you may be gaining things because I personally prefer the Bang & Olufsen audio system that's available in the ZDX to the AKG audio system that we find in the Cadillac Lyriq. Let me know what you think about that in the comment section, and are you on board with the ZDX's looks? I think the front end looks really cool. The back end from some angles looks just a tiny bit like a hearse. All it's missing is that little swiggle bar from the old style convertible top. But I might lean towards the ZDX. Let me know what you think about that down there. I would, however, lean closer to the Polestar 3 than either of those, but I think my personal ranking here would be Polestar 3, ZDX, then Lyriq. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below. And any way you slice it, I guess GM wins, because whether you go down market to a Blazer EV, or you get a Lyriq, or you get a Prologue, or you get a ZDX, they were all built by General Motors. See all of you later.